A couple of weeks ago, when I ranked all of Pixar's movies, I mentioned that it was a quarantine project of mine, and now I have the opportunity to share with you another one. A marathon of all the Harry Potter films. When my in-laws and I were trying to figure out what series of movies to binge, we tossed around a number of ideas. Eventually, we decided on Harry Potter since some of them had never seen any of these movies. On top of that, it had been several years since I had watched any of them, given that the Fantastic Beasts movies tainted my appreciation for the franchise. Which, on a side note, those movies do not exist, okay? Those movies don't exist! Needless to say, I was very excited to jump back into the universe I had fallen in love with as a kid. I read these books as they were published while I was in elementary school, and then, like everyone else, I got swept up in the hype of the film adaptations as they progressively came out as well. So yeah, revisiting a crucial part of my childhood sounded exciting to me. With that, let's get on with the rankings, shall we? Number 8, HalfBlood Prince. I really don't get why some people call this one of the best in the series. It's the only one I dislike. But I should point out that HalfBlood Prince is not a bad movie whatsoever. None of these films are. There are some significant differences between this film and the others though that really rub me off the wrong way. The first that I'll point out is that the color correction and lighting are just off. It goes beyond simply that the film is full of greens and muted tones, but also that the images just feel dimly lit. You could argue that the filmmakers did this to signal the impending doom of what's to come in the story, but then again, the Deathly Hallows movies are still darker in tone and have a much richer color palette to them, so that argument doesn't hold much water for me. But aside from that, I've just never liked how the narrative focuses so much of its attention away from Voldemort's backstory, which is where most of the book's interesting material was for me. I would have preferred this lengthy 2.5 hour long slog to give me more of that fascinating storyline than all of the snogging and situational comedy. But still, it has many great moments with the characters we've grown to love, and at least the ending sets up the final two films very well. Number 7, Sorcerer's Stone. Every great story has to start somewhere. In hindsight, The Sorcerer's Stone feels much weaker and less dramatic than the rest, since it has the burden of exposition weighing it down. The books have a wealth of lore woven throughout their text, so the first film inevitably had a lot to set up for. Because of this, it makes the story seriously drag for most of the first half. On top of that, the more cutesy, innocent tone makes for a fun adventure for sure, but one that doesn't really hit as hard as the films that come after. That being said, for the lack of a better word, this film is enchanting. Despite the dated visual effects and light tone, it works well enough as an introduction to the movie version of J.K. Rowling's world. So many seemingly insignificant elements end up really mattering from this first movie, and it remains entertaining to this day. Number 6, Order of the Phoenix. In the aftermath of the series' turning point, we have The Order of the Phoenix, a fun, enjoyable movie that remains faithful to the fourth installment's darker tone, while one that feels the emptiest in terms of what it adapts from the book. Ironically, the longest book at 870 pages for the US edition ended up being one of the shortest movies in the series. As a result, we got a movie that does move at a brisk pace, but often breezes by valuable information or just omits entire plot points from the book. But as someone who recognizes that film adaptations of books can be very limited, I am willing to overlook that weakness of what is otherwise a solid entry in this series. As a story that deals directly with Harry's traumatic experience with Voldemort and Cedric Diggory, it is fascinating to see how the magical community actively shuns Harry and Dumbledore for saying the unthinkable, that Voldemort returned. That's why it's both entertaining and inspiring to see some Hogwarts students rise up with Harry to do what's right, especially as Umbridge, masterfully portrayed by Imelda Staunton, poses an active threat to the school. Order of the Phoenix may have had a lot of untapped potential, but is still quite entertaining and memorable nonetheless. Number 5, Chamber of Secrets. And here we have what I think is the most underrated film in the series. Granted, it is a very long film, and mostly operates on the same dated levels of the original too. But the advantage Chamber of Secrets has over Sorcerer's Stone is that since the grand majority of the exposition had already been established, all the filmmakers needed to do was tell a good story. Thankfully, J.K. Rowling provided them with one. There are a lot of very fun and exciting elements to this magical mystery afoot in Hogwarts Castle, especially since it's a situation threatening the very livelihood of the student body as they're trying to keep the status quo of learning magic. And there's a lot of fun stuff to watch with that as well, such as a better executed Quidditch match, the goofiness involving Kenneth Branagh's Gilderoy Lockhart, and the general mischief that our three heroes get into. Yet Chamber of Secrets went just dark enough with its central plot involving the titular dungeon and Tom Riddle's diary, planting the seeds for the eventual hunt for the Horcruxes later on in the series. Overall, it's a great family-friendly mystery with just enough intrigue and darkness for people of any age to enjoy. Number 4, Goblet of Fire. The team had a huge task in making a film of similar length and scope to the previous ones, with material from a much larger book this time around. In my opinion though, they did a great job with Goblet of Fire. Again, like with Order of the Phoenix, there is a lot of stuff that had to be altered or completely ignored from the source material to make the film version work, but the end result is much more cohesive. In between those sequences are also many elements that add up to characters dealing with their increasingly mature thoughts and feelings, as well as the growing threat of Voldemort's return. And on that note, I deeply appreciate that this film officially marked the turning point for the series, the moment when Voldemort's terrifying resurrection into a bodily form signaled that this story would never be as innocent as it used to be. It's a multifaceted narrative that packs in everything that you might expect. Romance, action, drama, suspense, and even horror to a certain extent. I honestly don't get the hate for this one, and appreciate what it's trying to accomplish each time I come back to it. Number 3, Deathly Hallows Part 1. Even though this is technically just the first half of a longer movie, it still manages to be more dramatic, compelling, and emotionally resonant than most other movies in the whole series. It's strange to say this because the story honestly doesn't feel that eventful as a whole, even though many important dramatic moments do take place. What holds this movie together is the fact that hope, love, and courage prove to be the most powerful elements keeping the main characters focused on their quest. Things have never been more dire and dangerous than as Harry, Ron, and Hermione make the effort to find and destroy all of the Horcruxes. And the tone of this movie really sells that despair pervading the wizarding world, knowing that people are dying each day that our heroes don't make progress. A constant sense of dread is at work, making their situation hopeless, but also increasingly important. The execution of all these elements in the story doesn't always make for exciting material, but it was very tough for me to take my eyes off the screen when watching this again. The actors do a great job taking their characters to deep, dark emotional places they had merely tapped into with the previous movies, and it all serves as a harrowing preamble to the incredible climax to come. Speaking of which, Number 2, Deathly Hallows Part 2. The top 2 films in this list are honestly interchangeable. In this case, the one I consider to be the best film in the series takes the number 1 spot, while Deathly Hallows Part 2 is perhaps the more satisfying experience. Look, I get that the last maybe 10 minutes of this movie doesn't deliver quite the emotional gut punch we would have wanted from such a grandiose finale, but I honestly don't care. This had the massive task of wrapping up one of the biggest film franchises in history, and for what it's worth, the team did a wonderful job here. There's hardly a moment that feels wasted or cheapens what the story needed. Deathly Hallows Part 2 is stocked full of climactic showdowns and dramatic payoffs, the kind that you expect to see from a final installment as hyped up as this was. But at the same time, I'm also grateful that the movie knew when to be quiet, calm, and thoughtful as well. The filmmakers knew that to drive home the emotional impact, moments of intimacy were needed to make it work. These moments, along with the exciting, bombastic action, culminate in a completely epic conclusion to this story, and certainly one of the best films in the series. Well, except for Prisoner of Azkaban. When you get a master filmmaker like Alfonso Cuarón involved with your franchise, you know that you've got something great in store for audiences. While both parts of Deathly Hallows made deeper emotional impacts on me, it's hard to deny that Cuarón's work here was phenomenal. Everything about this movie feels, appropriately enough, magical. But honestly, unlike the other installments of this franchise, somehow Alfonso Cuarón and his team managed to capture this universe in a way that comes across as mystical and wondrous while you're observing it. There's an atmosphere to this film unlike anything experienced in the first 2 movies, and frankly, everything else afterward too. It almost seems as though the filmmakers captured lightning in a bottle and just figured out the perfect way to make Hogwarts feel completely authentic. Beyond the amazing cinematography, production design, and John Williams' excellent score though, the story itself is wildly entertaining as well. Pretty much every joke hits, and just like with Chamber of Secrets, there's a great undercurrent of a mystery running through the regular story of Harry and his friends attending school. This mystery just happens to be more dangerous and clever, with plenty of dramatic tension building up until it explodes at the Shrieking Shack, only to be risen to even tighter levels during the brilliant Time Turner sequence. There's just very little, if anything at all, that doesn't work in Prisoner of Azkaban. It's haunting, funny, creative, exciting, powerfully acted by an ensemble of Britain's finest actors, and undoubtedly the best film in the Harry Potter saga. The whole series is great, but it peaked in the installment given to us by a masterclass filmmaker.